You're listening to the MindPod Network. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bhakti Fest, the premier yoga, sacred music, and personal growth festival that happens on September 6th through 11th in Joshua Tree, California. Visit bhaktifest.com for more information. It's all happening. 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 Thank you for that very warm introduction. Episode 100 of the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast. That is me, your host. This week on the show, we have Taryn Southern, who is a return guest, and Jack Kornfield, who was on episode number 1 of this podcast. And with Taryn, we get into all sorts of great stuff on virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, how to cope with our future and embrace it and sort of find our own little home within the mutation that is happening around us. And Jack Kornfield gives us a very lovely dharma talk, sort of centered around how to find a loving kindness practice in the world that we're living today that is becoming increasingly complicated and full of what we think is separation. So episode 100, certainly when this podcast was started, and a big shout out to Elijah, who was, we did the first handful of episodes together, when 100 seemed like it was very, 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 very far away. And we never set out to do that many. I never, thought that this was an especially important milestone. But, so much has happened since that first episode, and I have learned so much about myself. One, that podcasting week in, week out is much harder to do than I thought it would be. And because of that, it has really forced me to dig in deep and embrace the things that I am good at, and to honor the things that I am good at, and to not be afraid of the things that I'm good at, and to simultaneously discard the things that I am not good at. It does take a certain amount of, of belief in yourself and belief in your abilities to provide content week in and week out, not in a megalomaniacal way, just in a very practical and pragmatic way. And it's been amazing. And thank you so much for everybody who's been listening week in and week out. It's truly very, very special. And thank you to everyone who, the last few months, I definitely took the podcast to a very personal place. There's no question about that, as I experienced a really, really deep sense of sadness and disappointment and betrayal and dishonesty, and really just, had my heart ripped out from me. And in a way that just, it just didn't really seem to make any sense to me. But it was a very, very powerful teacher. And so many of you really gave me some feedback that was mind-blowing and helped me to find my place in the world once again. So thank you for that. And, here we are, episode 100. We're just going to keep going. Nothing much more to say about, the milestone in and of itself. Just really happy that we made it, and it continues to take on a life of its own. So this week, like I said, Jack Kornfield and Taryn Southern, we're going to start with Jack Kornfield, who gives us a really special and sweet talk. It was so nice of him to beam in remotely, given his very, very busy schedule, and to distill the challenges and the techniques behind maintaining a personal practice through these challenging times, and reminds us that, all of this work that, we have done or haven't done, the point of doing it is that it's there for us during challenging times. When things are going very well, it's much easier to have a loving kindness practice and to, open your heart and spread it out to the world. But when things are difficult and there's lots of division and separation and bickering and anger out in the world, it becomes very, very hard. So Jack Kornfield here we go. Let's do this. Jack Kornfield, thank you for coming to the podcast. I really appreciate it. This is episode 100. You were on episode number 1. So really, I'm so grateful that you came back. Thank you.
Completing the circle. It's a pleasure.
Completing the circle. So yes. So I just wanted to check in with you really, really quickly. You know, this is certainly not an original thought. And it's, you know, through the media sphere and the podcast sphere and through the consciousness of so many people in the world right now, you know, there's no question that we are living in divisive times, and that the kind of the shock system of polarization and and it really seems to be extreme. And I can speak for myself in saying that it's definitely thrown off my practice in the way that, you know, I just sort of wake up less tranquil. I just wake up a little bit more riled up, and I feel a little bit more uneasy and less centered than I ever have before. So, you know, I just wanted to kind of check in and get kind of your wisdom on what you think about what's going on in the general sort of multiverse, but also, you know, how we deal with it.
Yeah, I've seen since the election in the fall and coming forward, a tremendous amount of anxiety in the groups of people that gather to meditate or that I teach. All kinds of fears. And part of what I try to communicate to people is difficult times like this is why we have been training and practicing for the years that we have. It's not just to have a beautiful, gracious connection with one another in the world, but also to be able to center ourselves and stay clear and strong and wise in difficult times. As Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh said, when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person on the boat remained centered and calm, it was enough. They showed the way for everyone to survive. And so we become that one person. It becomes all the more important and helpful to do our inner trainings, our meditation, our centering practices, in spite of all the anxiety that is being, and fears that's flying around and being directed at us. We don't want to let the outer terrors and terrorism and the fake news and fear-mongering take over our hearts. So that, yes, it's difficult, but actually it's also an act of courage and centeredness, and trust that you can do this amidst all the fake news and amidst all the ways that the political sphere is trying to activate people and activate their primitive brain. You know, the reptilian fight, flight, or freeze and the amygdala, all those images and words and so forth, they're going to get you. And the other side,
right?
Take a deep breath and stop. And center yourself and remember the universal values, the truths that are timeless. Hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And this is one of the first verses of the Dhammapada, the teachings of the Buddha. And then when we look around, Zach, we see that in many ways what's happening is we're still fighting the Civil War.
Yeah, exactly.
We've never really come to terms with the initial enormous suffering that gave birth to the culture that we live in now. There's a lot of denial still of the past 400 years, the majority of which, almost all, was either slavery or apartheid segregation with lynchings and beatings, and separation and poverty inflicted on millions and millions of Africans who were brought here. And we've also not come to terms with the genocide of the natives, that we came to this continent and there were millions of natives living here, and we marched through as a nation, as a new European-oriented culture, and slayed and killed them took their lands, destroyed their cultures.
Manifest destiny.
But I think what I think needs, and we have a great deal of fear and denial. There's the exceptionalism. We're the great U.S. of A.
Right.
What I think needs to happen both individually in our own hearts and collectively in our culture is something like the truth and reconciliation process that happened in South Africa, where Archbishop Tutu and other wise elders got garnered the elite of the nation to sit down and to convene these truth and reconciliation panels in which the stories and the truth of how much suffering there had been in apartheid and violence that was perpetrated were able to be told in a way that both acknowledged the grief and the pain and the loss and also invited the steps toward reconciliation. And South Africa is still in that process. But we as a nation, once we quiet the mind and open the heart and find ourselves in our center, then we can get up from our seat of stillness and connectedness and compassion and be one who invites truth-telling about the measure of pain and sorrow that underlies our culture and the fears that are there because we're in such denial. And if we can make a process in our local communities, and it's been recommended in places like Ferguson that there be a Truth and Reconciliation Council, and in other parts of the country they've started to do it. If we can actually hear and see collectively the shared suffering of our time, then it's possible that a real reconciliation and a new rebirth of a culture that's not divided against itself and telling false stories, that our culture can come together. So there's an inner reconciliation and an outer one.
Well, the outer one can't begin without the inner one, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the outer one can't begin without the inner one first, right? I mean,
right. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand because as you face the denial and the pain, you need some form of a practice of compassion, some form of a practice of mindful presence and tolerance, some way, some form of your own inner forgiveness to hold your own complicity or your own denial or just the ocean of tears that are present. But what's also critical for us inwardly is, and it's been said all over, is not to fuel the flames of the other. I mean, for thousands of years it's been the other, and all these different terrible fights in the recent centuries in Northern Ireland between the Protestants and the Catholics. Your people did this to my people. In Palestine and Israel, in Rwanda, in the former Yugoslavia between the Serbs and the Croats and the Bosnians. People get hold of the media in places like that and tell the stories of the other tribe, the other people who are going to take your lands and take your money and steal your women and children, and they activate the amygdala, they activate the fear response,
yes, and
they frighten people into going along with terrible things.
Yes.
Now, in my own inner practice, I do a practice of compassion and loving kindness, which perhaps many of your listeners do, and I include those people that are the ones causing the suffering. And in the practice of metta or loving kindness, one uses these inner intentions. May you be safe, or may you be well, may you be free from pain and sorrow and so forth. There are particular phrases that I find very helpful when I picture and envision those who are causing suffering, who also suffer themselves, although they may not be conscious of it. And so I wish, may you be free from hatred. May you too be free from fear. May you too find peace in your heart. May you be free from ignorance and denial. May you be free from hatred. May you be free from fear. May you be free from delusion. And that I can wish for anyone. I could wish it in my heart for dictators and Bashar al-Assad and for those who foment violence around the world or incite it or tell falsehoods that make so much suffering. May you too be free from hatred. May you too be free from fear. May you too be free from delusion. And it allows me to include in the circle of my practice a goodwill that is very genuine.
Wow, very beautiful. And like our dear friend Ram Dass does, if you could get to that level and put a picture of Donald Trump on your altar.
and as he has, Ram Dass has done. Yeah, Donald Trump replaced Dick Cheney, I think, on the center of his altar. Yeah,
it's just, I mean, everything that you're saying. I mean, it's so beautiful. I mean, I know my tendency is to get locked in the separation and seeing it as us versus them. But when I just get locked in that illusion of separation, also as Ram Dass likes to say, so to kind of hear you give, this practice that we've heard many times before, but in this context, it is very, very helpful, very beautiful, and very potent. So I hope, listeners, you're listening. And Jack, thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Zach, and congratulations on your 100th podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you, brother.
Take care.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bhakti Fest, the premier yoga, kirtan, and lifestyle festival out in Joshua Tree, California. It's coming up next week, September 6th through the 11th, and there are all sorts of amazing people there, from Radhanath Swami and Prem Baba and Krishnadas and Saul David Ray and Govidas and Radha and Fanafi Allah and Jayu Tal and myself. I'm certainly not lumping myself in with all those other great people, but I am going to be there. I'll be singing kirtan and doing Hanuman Chalisas. But Bhakti Fest is truly, truly an amazing gathering in a very, very special and highly vibrational place. And, if you are looking for, to quote the great TL, find the others. If you're looking to find the others, find people who are hovering at a similar vibrational output, who are sort of releasing themselves from fear, doubt, lack, and worry, who are stepping into solutions and who want to be part of the beauty and the bliss and the ongoing evolution of our planet and our species, and evolving in such a way that is positive and helpful and full of compassion and full of love and full of understanding and friendship and celebration for life. If you're looking for people who share these values and who want to step away from the paranoia and the illusion of separation that we see going on in the world today, and all of the bickering and all of the nonsense and all of the anger and argumentative sort of passions and threads, weaving in and out of all the various media cycles and social media channels, and if you want to step in to a blissful manifestation of humanity, go to Bhakti Fest. It really is an amazing, amazing gathering coming up in Joshua Tree next week. Go to bhaktifest.com to get your tickets. So we have back on the podcast Taryn Southern, who was on a good 50 or 60 episodes ago. And I met Taryn actually through a show that she was doing on YouTube called Party Fun Times, and I was a guest on that. But I certainly knew who Taryn was before that, prior to that. And she is very, I wanted to bring her back on. First, I like her. I get along very, very well with her, and I find her to be a very sharp and thoughtful mind. But she has done an incredibly difficult thing to do in the self-styled sort of media ecosystem world of today. She is managing to completely reinvent herself and jump into Taryn 2.0. She got famous and rather notable for being a YouTube personality and for making a lot of sort of videos which are aimed to, the YouTube audience, which is very, very young and it's playful and very, very youthful. But as she got older and and, got interested in topics that, transcended the limitations of being a YouTube star, she did it successfully, and she's very involved in virtual reality and augmented reality. And if you go to youtube.com/Taryn, she just made a song. She's singing it, but the music is entirely made by artificial intelligence collaborations. So yes, robots made the music. And the musicians out there, I'm sure, are freaking out. I did too in some ways. But that said, it was a very, very worthwhile experiment. So check out what Taryn's doing. She's great. I really enjoyed this chat, and I think you will too. Taryn Southern.
I wish I could see beyond what I can see. I wish I could touch beyond what I can touch. I wish I could feel beyond what isn't real. I wish I could imagine, yeah. There's more to who we are. There's more to what we could be. As I feel the weight of being, I'm learning how to break free. I'm better.
Taryn Southern, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, for sure. This is episode 100.
I know. I'm so
cool?
excited.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a lucky number.
Yeah, it is. What
Triple digits.
What does numerology mean? I don't even really know, but it's a milestone,
Yeah.
when you set off to do something. When you did all your YouTube videos and you finally made 100 of them, you're like, whoa, I made 100 of these, right?
Yeah. Congratulations,
Thanks.
Ax.
And you made thousands?
Definitely over 1,000.
Over 1,000.
I think over 1,500.
Wow. So at the peak when you were doing YouTube star Taryn, how many a week were you doing?
Well, one on my channel, but I was making multiple for other platforms and other channels. So probably between 5 and 7 a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It's hard to make good content, isn't it?
It is hard. That's why most of it wasn't good. Let's be honest.
Do you look back on it like that? Do you kind of look?
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. It's a hamster wheel that I'm really happy I jumped off.
Have you taken anything down?
I have. I've taken down over 100 videos.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah,
Really?
unlisted. So not removed permanently, but unlisted so that you can't find them if you search. Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's been a big part of my metamorphoses, I think, was removing some of the past.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, I think about that a lot. You hear musicians say that a lot. Musicians who have very, very long careers, and they go back and they look at their first couple albums and they're like, oh my God, if only I could remove that from the, But
the internet doesn't forget is the problem.
The internet doesn't forget.
Even the stuff I've tried to remove, there's other, duplicated postings on other channels.
So for all you people sending too many dick pics, be careful. The internet doesn't forget.
That's right.
That's right. So the NSA
That's a great title for a book.
For all you people sending, the internet doesn't forget.
The internet doesn't forget. I'm writing that down.
Okay. We're writing that down. Nobody steal it, please. You're right. That is kind of a good name because it's also very true. So, when I first met you, Party Fun Times, you were sort of transitioning, I think, from one world into the other. So there's a lot to talk with you about, but describe your sort of metamorphosis and sort of like what is it that you're doing now and what sort of inspired the change?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's right. So Party Fun Times, I was smack dab in the middle of personal metamorphosis. But the funny part about that project was it was sold under former Taryn, former version of self, to Maker Studios, and it was originally envisioned as this sort of late night comedic talk show with internet celebrities and the like. And once it came time to production, I had a full-on mental breakdown, had basically released several videos on the internet talking about how I was in a really bad space. My own agents were calling me being like, should we shut down the Party Fun Times thing? Like, what do we do? And I was like, let me think about it. And then ended up going forward with the project, but having a great conversation with Maker, wherein they said, if you want to tweak this a bit, feel free. And so we did. It's not like I had full license to go make some sort of self-help show, but what I did sort of end up doing was taking on different topics that I think were a bit more meaty than or interesting than what we had originally conceived for the show. Yeah.
And I remember at the time, like, you were putting some things out there that maybe your core sort of YouTube audience found a little bit, maybe edgy?
Yeah. Edgy, and not just like, my comedy had always been edgy, but it was always just sort of sexually subversive versus taking on topics
psychedelics
psychedelics.
Right.
And we covered a ton of different topics. Actually, I can't remember anything right now.
Virtual reality. Politics and stuff like that. Right.
Like whatever we could do. It still had it was still through a comedic lens, but it was helpful for me to say, okay, I can dabble in these other things as a content creator. But the second that I got done with that show and we realized that unfortunately it wasn't going to be renewed for a second season, that marked the beginning of me really taking some time off and taking stock in what I wanted to do. And there were a number of ideas I had been throwing around for me to explore my exploration with an audience, such as a podcast, which I discussed with you many times. You've been so kind to give me advice on, and of course I never ended up getting off the ground. I did do several sample episodes.
We'll do it one day.
But I think it was one of those things where I almost felt like for the first time, I was like, I actually want to just do my exploration on my own without filming it, without publicizing it.
Okay.
It was almost like I needed just a break from being on camera or even recorded just to do my thing.
You don't have to eventize every move.
That's right. Yeah. I think I was getting so sick of recording everything I was doing. And so of course I, as much as I wanted to immediately launch into a new project, the best thing that I could do was actually just take the time off. So I did. And I spent a tremendous amount of time getting into the VR and AR space. I spent some time really looking further into the ASMR space on YouTube.
Oh my God, that's right.
Which
I blame
Zach you. Was just astounded by, because we discussed ASMR on his episode of Party Fun Times that he came on to. But I was just so curious, like how people were using different technologies to make new types of content. I thought, I know as an artist, I will always be drawn to make stuff. I will always be a content creator. It's in my blood. I just didn't want to make the content I was making anymore. It no longer reflected who I was. And so I just dove into all these other areas. So I actually spent a lot of time with Allie.
You did?
I did. Her and her husband, when they come out to LA.
In Austin? She lives in Austin or something?
Yeah, but they were here in LA quite a bit. So we hung out a bunch, and I just really enjoyed hearing everything that they were doing and the research that was going on with ASMR. And then obviously in the VR and AR space, doing that, I got involved with a couple of longevity groups because I just find longevity science really interesting. Started helping them figure out some content strategies for what they're doing. Neuroscience and neurotech, which is how I met my current boyfriend. I just started offering up advice and help to people who worked in areas I found fascinating on the content creation side, to see maybe there's something down the line that I can sort of either inject myself in or create for myself. So I did that for about a year. So
when you're looking at like something like neuroscience or longevity or, eventually virtual reality, oh my goodness, I have a fuzzy button going on here and the sound drops down. And you kind of see something that is promising in the way it can affect our lives out in the world, and, how technology can really, mutate the human experience, so to speak. What is the content strategy, though? How do you look at that and say, like, how do you look at something like longevity and go, oh, okay, well, what's a content strategy for that?
Yeah. I mean, the easiest entry point for me is to talk to these people and say, you're only reaching the audience that's already interested in this stuff. How do you talk about these things to a broader audience, and how can I help you do that?
Okay.
And that's just a way to get myself in the door to these conversations and these people so I can learn.
Yes.
And then figure out maybe there's something here that I can do. So that was my...
Did you cross paths with Kurzweil?
I'm trying to think. No, I didn't. But a bunch of people in that camp certainly.
He claims he's going to live to 200 years old.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I went to Dr. Grossman.
Oh, you did? He's his guy. That's his guy, right?
I did Grossman's whole
Wow.
Testing process last September. Did my telomeres and my chromosomes.
So what do
By
you...
the way, are we cool on the static? I wasn't sure. It seemed to get louder.
Oh, no, it's cool now. Yeah, it just, when it dropped for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good now. Yeah, I can look at the levels here.
Awesome.
We're fine. Yeah, so what do you make of all of that? Do you... I mean, there's several elements to it. There's the nanotechnology thing, which is actually, the infusion. I mean, I have the infusion of kind of silicone parts and chips into the human condition, and I believe that is human being 2.0. But, that aside, through supplements and just, you think we're going that way? You think we're going to live?
It's super compelling. I mean,
it is, isn't it?
I think, so I've already made a bet I'll live to be 120. So according to some of these camps, that's probably a conservative number.
Oh my God.
I feel like it's a pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Not conservative, but also not a stretch of the imagination to say that I would live to be 120. There's a word for this, and I'm struggling. Zach, help me. I'm on a podcast. I just need to be able to verbalize myself.
You can talk it through on podcasts.
My family actually has great genes. Like my great grandmother lived to be 103 and had a letter from Harry Truman.
Oh wow.
She was or 106. I'm sorry.
Wow.
So yeah, back when. And typically the women in my family lived to be in their late 90s, early 100s.
Okay.
So in my mind, I'm thinking, what's another 15 years?
Absolutely. I mean,
and they grew up without, they had no money. They had no access to.
Well, this is the issue, right? Which we always, I've come across people in India. Specifically, he just left his body about 3-4 years ago. His name was Chota Maharaj, which means little Maharaji. And there were rumors he was guaranteed to be at least 110, but they said he was probably like 140.
Wow.
And many, many Indian scholars kind of grilled him on history that only he would know. Anyway, he was really old. But India has a completely different relationship with his elders, and he was kind of a guru, so he was taken care of. So here in the West, the problem is money.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You're probably, you're pretty successful and savvy, but for people who live that long, what are you going to do from age 80 to 110?
Absolutely.
How are you going to live?
We ask this question, but we also have to assume that with this longevity comes a much longer state of well-being, or at least that's the hope. Because we currently have people in their 60s and 70s who have terrible conditions,
yes, quality of life
diseases,
is the issue.
They might as well be in senior homes, right?
Yeah.
People in the Midwest are dying younger now, white males, than they have been in the past 50 years. That's the new stat, which is crazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Depression, anxiety, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. It's actually lowered the life expectancy amongst middle class white males in middle America.
Wow, that probably has a lot to do with the changing economic fabric, right? Because
for sure.
Everything that those communities were built on, it's gone.
For sure.
Manufacturing is gone. Blue collar working is gone, right?
Exactly. So I think the conversation should be more around how do we extend well-being more than life expectancy. But I assume that if you're living to be 110, there's a woman out of France who's, I can't remember how old she is, but she's a yoga teacher, and I think she's
I've seen her.
Yeah, right? And it's like...
She's great, yeah.
There was another woman who was one of the oldest women to live, and she was out and about walking and driving her car until 104. So I think those are the things we want to optimize for.
Yeah, and it really...
Those are the states we want to optimize.
Yeah, those are the states. And so much of that comes also, it comes from your mental sort of, faculties and just sort of happiness, doesn't it?
Yep.
Most people I know who sort of all of a sudden they have a very quick, deterioration of quality of life. It's because they get miserable.
For sure. Or you lose a partner, and that's another big part of it.
Death is, yeah.
It's hard. But if you go into if we get into the whole money side of the equation and how people can actually live that long and support themselves, there's so many considerations around the future with AI and cost of living. And we're going to have so many problems. It's like, that's just one of 1,000.
Well, let's talk about that. That's a great segue, because the Elon Musk, universal basic income thing, as it relates to AIs. I mean, that's huge. And as we kind of see it in today's fabric, and many of the great lies within the political spectrum, that Trump was so successful at capitalizing on was illegal immigration. Oh my God, they're taking your jobs. They're not fucking taking your jobs. Robots are taking your jobs.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, automation
Yep.
is by far has replaced the American worker more than illegal immigrants.
That's right.
Yeah. So talk about AI. Let's, I mean, I am sort of duplicitous in my relationship with it.
I'd love to hear your relationship with it.
Well, I'm a futurist. I consider myself to be a transhumanist. I'm all for the human mutation. For us to think that this is the end of the Homo sapien line, that we're not going to evolve anymore, is completely naive. I mean, human beings think that like this is the end of our evolution. Absolutely not. I think human being 2.0 is going to be the fusion of technology and human being.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and it's fine, but as the cliche goes, what are we going to do when machines start programming themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many questions that present themselves, and we get to bear witness to the beginning of this transition, which is really interesting.
Well, you just made a song. Well, let's talk about the song. Yeah. I mean, that's a good little beginning of this bearing witness thing. But,
yeah, absolutely. So I started writing an album using only AI, and I'm working with 4 or 5 different AI companies, platforms, to make this project happen. I released the first single off the album yesterday, or 2 days ago. And the album for me was actually a creative exploration of these very topics that we're discussing. And I thought, what better way to explore these topics than through music, which is my favorite form of expression, and with the very technology that is both exciting and threatening to people and myself. Like you, I'm equally conflicted. So the album itself, each song is written through the perspective of a different human. So the song that I wrote 2 days ago is from the perspective of a human who cannot wait to merge with machines and explore other forms of consciousness.
Awesome.
And it was funny because people really thought that the song was about an AI. And so there was a lot of negative feedback or criticism on the lyrics. Like, why the hell would of course an AI would write a song about breaking free into other forms of consciousness. And I'm like, well, actually it was a human that wrote those lyrics about another human who wants to do it. But anyway, each song is really representative of these different perspectives that I have and I house within my single mind as I contemplate the future.
So that's sort of like the Matrix model, right? Mm-hmm. Wanting to kind of break free and merge
outside of this biological existence full of human limitation. And that's equally exciting to me as it is the perspective of another song where it's a human who just wants everything to go back the way it was when things were simple. And we were forced to only live and communicate under a biological tent.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, there is no turning back. I mean, that's for sure. And it's like this with every great technological revolution. I mean, my dad would tell stories of his mother. My dad was born in 1920. His mother was freaked out by the telephone. Could never make friends with the telephone. Wow. Thought it was just sort of like, the
devil,
the crazy, sort of devil machine, Yeah. And they lived in Springfield, Massachusetts, but she never made friends with it until the day she died. Very, very fascinating, right? So we've always done, had this relationship with it, but looking at the dark side for a second. So what are some of your concerns?
Some of my concerns are that, okay, so I'll preface my concerns by saying they don't matter. It doesn't matter what I'm concerned about or what Joe down the street is concerned about. You're right. Like the inevitability of this technology is here. And if you don't like it or you don't take part in it, well, someone else will, which forces society into a certain direction that that, I don't know, I guess only thoughtful discussion can kind of yield some interesting thought-provoking solutions about how we can all take part, or at least try to get most of us to take part in an existence we all enjoy and like, even if we have different ideas about what the future looks like. But my concerns are really that I mean, they're not far off from all the dystopian ones we see in entertainment, which is just that there will be a huge percentage of people left behind, whether they like it or not. I'd like to think that the future is something that people can either choose to participate in, right? And if they choose to participate, then they can. Yes. That's what I would like to think. The dystopian version is that they don't have a choice, that they just get left out. And then of course, like my own concern is that I will be part of that group.
Right. Of course, it's mine too. Right. You know, I mean, there's this Department of Labor statistic, which I've mentioned on this podcast before, but, and this is from the Department of Labor, you know, very mainstream, that 60% of all elementary school students today will work in a job that has yet to exist. 60%. So being left behind. What you said was interesting, though, because it's so much about your relationship to it. Are you going to embrace it and jump in and find something that you want to do, or are you going to push it away?
I will, because my personality is.
Yeah, mine is too. Yeah.
We're both drawn towards, I think, adaptability.
Yeah.
To me, that is far less scary than attempting to keep my feet in the sand and hold on to something that I hold dear, rather.
But how do we kind of get this, how do we get this way of thinking kind of into the mainstream about, especially within, much younger people? How do we sort of encourage them to, explore the stuff and jump in and just get interested?
Certainly not through our current American Judeo-Christian framework, sad to say, but it's not one that actually adapts well to change or even encourages an adaptation to change. And the reality is that the world is changing so freaking fast that that I think there will be a force function that will probably not be pretty, that will force people into adaptability. What happens when China or when Russia or whatever country it is that's got far more manpower and a different framework at looking at life, embraces these technologies, races forward, and all of a sudden America as a country is fighting for survival.
It's just left in the dust, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
People are going to be forced to change. But yes, I mean, I think about this stuff all the time, is like, how do we encourage this type of thinking? I mean, I think, certain countries, a lot of European countries and Asian countries are already sort of embedding a lot of this thinking into their education. I just don't know that we do that in America. I was lucky because in high school I went to a program that was a European baccalaureate program where we were forced to take philosophy, and we were forced to take a class called Theory of Knowledge, where they teach you how to think about thinking. Which is like
critical thinking.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, right.
To ask questions, to think about adaptability, to think about these things. And I think that was life-changing.
Yeah, the model for, Western education and our public school system is still sort of based in this. The education system and the curriculum and the basic K through 12 model was based on the participation in the Industrial Revolution, about being a good worker. And it's the same model that came from, the 19th century.
Yep. Show up, follow the rules.
Show up, follow the rules, but just very sort of, linear math, science, history, literature. It's very, very linear, and it doesn't encourage critical thinking.
And it's very fixed.
It's very fixed, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay, well, this is one topic about adaptability. The next is, again, Elon Musk. Killer robots from the future are going to come back and kill us because we made them too smart.
Yeah.
And he's, put billion. Hold on. Stupid machine. We're going to have to get a new mixer for the podcast, people. But we're going to
donate to Zach's new fund on GoFundMe.com.
Or just make an Amazon portal donation. That's fine too.
He takes Bitcoin.
I really don't. I should have.
What?
I know. I don't.
Come on, Zach.
And I'm one of those people. I'd be a rich man if I saved all my Bitcoin.
Oh no.
When I used Bitcoin, I was into it like about 5 years ago. I was it's one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was buying them
painful.
At $90.
Yep.
3,200 now?
Yep.
Crazy. Painful. Oh, well. But yeah, Elon Musk has, he's put money into this fund about responsible AI development. So robots from the future don't
OpenAI.
OpenAI. So is that a real thing?
I think we just don't have any idea. We have no clue. We can't even predict. I think for right now, the threat is far more simplistic. They don't have to be intelligent to be given a command that they simply follow through on, right? Like, at least in the near future, I don't see them being intelligent enough in the near future.
Yes.
To decide on their own. What's the word I'm looking for? On their own, we call it free will, or whatever we call the robots, on their own accord, to start killing humans. Maybe one day it will get there, but for now, I would be just more concerned with them following a random structure of orders that then leads to some very problematic situations for us.
Well, the big question, the big debate is, can machines have consciousness?
Yeah.
And the second they develop, this thing that we call consciousness, then we start getting into some problematic areas.
Yep.
So far, we're so far away from that. So not a complete sentence, but we are very far away from that.
Yeah.
So, but...
Although some argue that OpenAI, which was designed to prevent problems, has actually created more of them.
Yeah. Well, of course, because with any open structure, you see this in computer architecture or Android phones, there are always nefarious people.
Yep.
Always, and this is why, Macs, iPhones don't really have viruses in the same way that PCs do, because it's closed, you can control the experience. And so there are always people out there who are nefarious, who are looking to kind of develop this. But how far off do you think that is, though? How far off do you think it is to where we will have some kind of anthropomorphic sort of living entity that's just hanging out with us, whether it's, a sex doll or a worker, a maid. I don't know.
They're already here. We've got people in Asia getting married to their sex robots.
I know, it's crazy.
So it depends on what level you're talking about. But something that's quite proliferated our society, I'd say 10 to 15 years, maybe less, 7. What's your guess?
Yeah, at the level to where you're really like, your doll, your companion is sitting at the dinner table and it can actually have a conversation with you.
I would say 10 years. The thing is, because we already have these robots that are being developed specifically for it. Not always, but a lot of this stuff starts for really good reason, for senior care homes, to give seniors, there's these robots that have been developed to give seniors a companion and to help them take their medicine. And they're quite extraordinary. Like, you gotta go check these out. They don't look real, but they do a lot.
Heard of this.
And I'd say give that a few years, that tech is going to be a lot better. And then you'll start seeing other people outside of seniors.
Wow. That's, yeah.
But when you realize that it can save lives, that it can be a super cost-effective way of looking after mom and dad over a human caretaker, like, these things get developed very quickly when those are
when that's the motivation.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we were saying, with old people and quality of life issues, that's a huge motivation to. And
we've got a lot of old people that are going to need to be taken care of in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Look at the baby boomers.
Yeah, the baby boomers are living a little longer than we thought.
Exactly. And they're not going to have jobs either. So it's like they need a companion too. play bridge with.
Yeah, to play bridge with. And this also kind of dovetails into the nanotechnology thing and about sort of, I mean, some of, maybe not quite baby boomers, but Generation Xers who are going to start augmenting themselves. And then it's sort of the fusion of all of this. And
yep.
I mean, you're on board with sort of, the personal decisions that you can make on the egg freezing thing.
Yep. I just froze my eggs.
You just froze your eggs. I mean, that is, and I want to talk about your reasons for doing so, which is really to me, it's the more fascinating part of the discussion, not the actual technology. The technology is cool too, but the fact that you can actually, Taryn Southern made this choice of to sort of augment your biological, bell curve and be, I'm this age, I'm in this relationship, I have choices.
That's right.
So what'd you do? Tell me about it.
Yeah. I got 14 of those little guys on ice. 14? Now, barring improvements in the science, that actually statistically only means I've got 1.2 babies, healthy babies. Just because it's when you freeze eggs and then you unfreeze them and then you have to sperminate them to make an embryo, there are a lot of potential complications that result in dead little Taryn eggs. I mean, they're not, you can't call them dead because they're so not, sad. They're just eggs, but whatever, non-functioning Taryn eggs. But I basically have enough to safely say that statistically I'd get a kid out of it. And I could potentially use those eggs at any point in my future.
Theoretically, they could stay on ice. They have a indefinite shelf life?
Indefinite.
Oh, shit. I didn't know that.
That's the way cryo works. Wow. It's amazing, right?
Yeah. That's kind of wild.
Yeah. So I could be 75 and just all of a sudden decide I'm ready to pop one out. Well, I guess I wouldn't be the one to pop it out.
Your surrogate robot kid, right?
Yeah, and obviously that's not the plan, but I think what's exciting for me is, you're right, shifting the biological bell curve. I feel like I'm still 20 years old, but my biology says otherwise, and men have a very different biological bell curve than women. So to be able to take that into my own hands so that I can make the decision when I want to make the decision, it is super powerful, more psychologically than anything else.
That's pretty empowering.
Very empowering. Yeah. I can't tell you how many women have reached out to me after I did the egg freezing. I publicly posted a video about it on Facebook and YouTube, and I think 10 years ago that would have been pretty big faux pas.
Yes.
And I had a couple people make comments like, "Oh, she's never going to get a date again. Like, what a way to scare a guy away." And I thought, that's so strange. I don't even identify with that frame, because in my mind, I think if I'm a dude looking at me, I'm like, well, she's going to be super relaxed and chilled out.
For me, being a guy looking at you, attractive woman, just the opposite.
See, great.
I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, because I hear all the time about my girlfriends who haven't yet frozen their eggs and are starting to get antsy or already in panic mode, and they're going on dates, and it's like guys can feel the anxiety, bless their hearts. And so for me, psychologically taking that off the table it makes me feel free. It makes me feel unconcerned about how my future progresses.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? That you can literally just sort of put something on ice that previously had a timetable to it.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting. Yep. Huh.
And it'll be my younger Taryn eggs too, which are always... I think that's also an interesting part of this whole thing, is that the older you get as a woman and as a man with your sperm as well, you just increase the rate of potential neurological disorders with the kids. So to have 31-year-old eggs
that's awesome
on ice, it's cool.
So it just the technicalities of it, I'm just curious, it was 14 at once.
So they basically inject you with a ton of hormones.
Wow.
So that you're forced to produce multiple eggs. Typically, you only produce one a month in your cycle, but this causes you to produce a bunch.
Oh, wow. How'd you feel?
Bloated.
But did you, not to...
I was actually okay through the whole process. It wasn't the last 2 days I got real snappy. but I got aggressive. You did not want to be in my presence the last 2 days, but it's about 2 weeks of hormones.
Okay.
So it's a long process. But it was pretty easy for me. And then you do the retrieval, and they just retrieve as many. They actually retrieved 20 eggs, 22 eggs from me, I was so shocked because I thought it would be a lot less, but sadly only 14 of them were healthy and mature enough to actually freeze.
Interesting with that whole hormonal thing. I did some testosterone boosters once just to kind of see what it would be like.
What'd it do?
Too aggressive.
Really?
Yeah, it just was not like, the positive, the negative side effects outweigh the positive side effects for me.
Interesting.
And just how my biology works, it was like, sure, the good parts are fine, but no, I was extra snappy.
But you noticed a big shift in did it change how you view yourself and your identity? To have this like chemical response that ultimately can change a lot of different things about you? Yeah,
absolutely. No, it really did. That's actually a good question. It did, because it did sort of, like the testosterone in and of itself, you can't blame for manifesting anger or aggression. It's not just the chemical's fault. Like, it's in you somewhere, and then that just sort of makes it bloom. So I was like, oh shit, maybe I do have some unchecked anger issues I need to look at. And this is just bringing it to the surface.
Yeah, it was expressing itself in you differently.
It was expressing itself, and I was, and also, aside from the personal thing, it did, the whole HGH thing, it's very common amongst, men these days. And it made me sort of like, wow, I think a lot of people out there are really, altering their testosterone levels. And there's a lot of aggression out there, and for this very reason. Maybe one reason why, war is still so popular. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was trippy. And I just did pills. I didn't do HGH or anything like that, and just did it for a couple months. Yeah. Interesting. So what did you, from the egg freezing thing, and, as that being sort of representative of, I think sort of a nanotechnology application, I'd call it that. What is the thing that you would do next if you could?
Ooh, that's a fun question.
That's the only question I wrote down, by the way.
There are definitely things that I would. We live in LA too, so there's definitely maybe a broader acceptance of quote unquote augmentation.
Oh my God, have you seen the billboards, the vaginoplasty billboards?
No.
They're like the billboards. There's one at the corner of Westwood and Santa Monica. It's a huge, giant billboard, the vaginoplasty thing.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, only in LA.
That's very popular here, I've heard.
Only
these
in
doctors
wow.
specialize in it. They make so much money. It's so sad, actually. It's because of porns.
It's kind of tragic.
It's very tragic. Don't touch your vagina. No, but I think I probably am a bit more open to what kinds of augmentations. I'm trying to think. For me, I would really like to not have gray hair as I get older. So I'm starting to get them. Okay. And it's upsetting me. I would really like to have something that I could do to avoid that. I think a more fun augmentation would be something related to turning on flow states. I don't know what that augmentation might look like, whether it's a nootropic or a device, or I don't know, optogenetics, but I would love that. I would love to be able to go in and out of flow states I choose.
Some say microdosing is that.
I've heard this. I've tried microdosing twice, which isn't very much at all.
Yeah.
And I did not find that to be the case, but I think it's also you have to probably get the right amount going. And
the amount is key for the microdosing thing. Yeah. Actually, in my other podcast, the MAPS podcast, which I also do, the last episode was on microdosing. And,
I should listen to it then.
And the amount is key because if you get literally, 2 mics too much, then you start getting too psychedelic, and it just has to be right. Yep,
and you get pulled out of. Yeah. So one time it was a little too much. The other time I didn't feel anything at all. So I was like, And it's one of those things where whenever you're trying it, you want it to be on a day where you don't have anything too important going on. So I haven't given it another shot.
Interesting. Huh. So, with all of these these things, and you have a pretty good front row, seat for, what's happening in augmented technology and artificial intelligence and virtual reality as well. I feel that, artificial intelligence, because, that has a much wider sort of umbrella to what artificial intelligence is. In a way, Google is the biggest AI bot in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, that has mass penetration to it. But what about I feel, I don't know if you disagree, but I feel like VR is stuck.
Interesting. In what way?
That, this comes from me, I was, thanks to my dad, but, we were kind of getting into VR in the early 90s, with NASA Ames, with Jaron Lanier and all of these great things. Then it kind of was stuck for a while in the 8-bit world, and it just didn't look good. And finally, the technology's here to make it look good. But I feel it's stuck because the public at large won't wear headsets.
Yep. It's too cumbersome. It's not social.
It's not sexy.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
No, I have the exact same criticism, and it's for that reason that I've been getting more and more interested about AR and learning about how to create AR. I think AR is going to see its heyday in the next year, like in a big, big, big way. And then I think what will happen is, really the only difference is transparency between AR and VR.
No, so that's it, essentially. Yeah.
So I think once those glasses for AR get really good, and then we can just sort of drop the transparency, then all of a sudden we have VR, and the two platforms are forced to kind of dance together and play together. So I think we'll figure it out. But I do think VR has its place. There are times where I really enjoy the immersiveness of it. But it's almost like, in my mind, I don't go to the movie theater all day, every day. To me, a movie theater is an immersive movie experience because I can't look at my phone. I don't have any distractions.
Right.
But it's a special thing. So I see myself, even as a consumer, being someone that would use AR all the time and VR sometimes.
Yeah, if there was an AR sort of, I wear glasses, I have them on right now. If I could just sort of, plug it in right now to these frames that I'm wearing and and just sort of augment my life, it'd be great. But VR, it's still sort of, as it stands today, it's still sort of stuck in this very, it's still very nerdy. Mm-hmm. It's still kind of guys with PCs and sort of tethering it up, man. Check out these, it's still too nerdy.
And it's complicated. For me to set up my Vive, cost thousands of dollars.
That's a big thing.
It was such a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And if it takes that much work from me, of course it's going to take a really long time to catch on for the majority of people. It was hard.
There's a lot going on there, and you got to get a PC and trick it out. It has to have a good graphics card,
And if you're a Mac person like I am, you're done. Just pulling out a PC, it's like,
tell me about it. It's terrible.
It just really is hard to do.
But that being said, I'm still a fan. There's great things happening. What do you think is the most promising VR application kind of going around today?
For me, I think well-being.
What do you mean? What does that mean?
I put health under that category, and I also put, what would I want to say, sort of transcendental experience under that category. Ooh. So I think the ability for VR to create transcendent experiences for people, taking them outside of their... it really puts you on a rocket ship outside of your current reality. And for people who haven't done psychedelics and haven't had that experience, most of the time going into VR for the first time, it creates a sense of wonder and awe that can only be described, when you're in it. But and I'm talking about this in terms of like content on the Vive and Oculus, not using Google Cardboard.
Yeah, sure,
right? It's a very different experience. Yes, but I think it has, we've seen through numerous medical studies that it has the power to alleviate pain in burn victims, that it has the power to alleviate PTSD symptoms in soldiers, that it has the ability to encourage empathy and sort of highlight biases for people that they didn't know they had. So you basically create a lot of aha moments for people when they're in this sort of immersive world. And their biological reptilian or mammalian brain can't tell the difference because it's so good that they're not just like watching something for entertainment purposes. It's actually becoming embedded in them in a different sort of way. So I'm excited about it for those applications, for health, and then for, I guess, whatever you want to call it, some sort of transcendental experience where people come out of it different than when they walked in.
Wasn't there some case study out there? Or I don't know if it was isolated or if it happened more than once, but there was some case study out there who was like a paraplegic started to kind of redevelop spinal activity.
They're using this quite a lot, actually, for neurorehabilitation.
Wow.
For paralysis. So we're actually covering this in the documentary I'm doing on the brain. And there's a couple of scientists who have used VR with incredible success for restoring movement in quadriplegics and other people with motor issues.
So let's describe to the listeners exactly what that is, because when I read about it, I sort of had to connect the dots.
Yeah.
You have on the headset,
Yep.
and you are what?
And every study is different, but basically, what they do is they hook you up to the headset. You see virtual hands and feet in the headset, right, that are linked. Depending on your level of existing motor control, the study they tailor it to each person. But let's say you have no movement in your feet, they will have you focus on moving your feet
In the virtual reality environment. So we get that, yes.
Yep. And they tell you to do this. They actually program it so that if you are completely paralyzed, if you're a quadriplegic, they'll actually embed an electrode in your brain, in the motor cortex. Your motor cortex, when you think about moving something, it actually fires a bunch of neurons, right?
Yeah.
And these electrical signals, they just can't get all the way down to your feet. Because you've severed a spinal cord or whatever, but the signals still occur. And so the signals then get attached to the VR device and will allow for movement to occur within the VR space with your virtual feet. So as you have these thoughts, the virtual feet move. And what ends up happening is over time, the brain starts to essentially create new electrical signaling patterns because it's actually getting the reward of the feet moving through the firing of the cortex. And a lot of these people end up regaining pieces of movement in various parts of their body.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow. Has there been a case yet to where someone's permanently regained it? Or is it just there are not fully regained movement, but there are a number of patients in Brazil under this Dr. Nicolalis, who also works at a Duke, and some patients out of Stanford. And then there are other ones, too, around the world. I mean, there are multiple simultaneous studies going on. And the effectiveness, of course, depends, too, on how much movement the patients already have. The more movement they already have, like if they're just paralyzed waist down, the more likely they are to regain that movement. That is just... To me, that totally blows my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, that just leaves me speechless. That is amazing. I mean, that completely,
It's so cool.
It's so cool.
Our brains are so plastic. That's the thing. And so by creating these new visual stimuli and basically reward systems for the brain, they can facilitate new connections to be made in areas of the brain that have been shut off for quite some time as a result of the lack of movement.
So... Okay, so the physiology behind this is it's not the brain that is when you're paraplegic. It's not the brain that sort of gets damaged. It's the receptor that the brain is talking to. Yep. But the brain is so powerful that it could repair the receptor.
That's right. So and basically, I mean, if you are, let's say you've severed your spinal cord, there's typically some connections still left. The problem is that those may not have been the connections that you're in most, like, especially if there's like only a tiny part of the connection left. Your brain was not using just that little connection previously to create movement. Yes. And so you've shut off all of these connections that your brain has been accustomed to and learned how to move with since you were born. Now you are creating new connections with whatever is left. And so the brain has to just completely learn a new way of communicating with other parts of your body.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's just so crazy. So is the idea that again, in the paraplegic example, that enough hours inside of VR that, there's sort of like an internal sort of neurological muscle memory thing developing, and it'll eventually.
That's right. The longer you spend in it, the better you get. And by the way, I'm saying all of this from a non-scientist. So there are people out there who can explain all of this much more articulately and probably accurately than I am doing. But that's sort of the nuts and bolts of how it works. But yeah, the longer you stay in it, the more likely you are to regain movement. And some people, they just haven't seen results. But the majority of those who've been put through these programs have seen some sort of results. And these are people who have been through physical therapy for decades and had nothing
going on.
Nothing going on.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's really amazing. But for you personally, what's your favorite thing going on in VR? From what do you like to do?
Ooh. What I would like to figure out as a content creator is how to create these aha experiences for people.
Yeah.
I find the medical stuff to be the most fascinating, just because it's like how you're reacting right now. It's honestly mind-blowing to watch it happen. And fortunately, knock on wood, I have my faculties about me for health.
Yes.
So I don't need it for that. But I would like to see VR. I would like to see more people in the VR space take advantage of the opportunity that it presents to actually immerse people in some kind of different world where they can think critically about certain topics or ask questions that they wouldn't otherwise be forced to ask. And so I know that's a very ambiguous way of sort of answering that question, but I want to create really beautiful experiences for people. So actually, I'm doing a VR experience for the album, which I did not include in my announcement, but Google VR gave me a grant. So
cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to be doing a few of the AI music, a few of the AI songs as like a musical experience where people can interact and basically shift the music in the experience.
Oh, that's very cool. I love it.
Yeah.
Wow. So you can sort of remix it on the spot, sort of?
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Fun.
So that'll take a little while, but we're working on it. I mean, we've just started the project and working with some amazing artists as well in the space to make this happen and bring it to life. But I'm hoping that it will allow people to create music in a way that they may not have considered possible before.
Have you seen Android Jones, his VR thing?
That's amazing.
That's pretty cool, right?
Epic.
Yeah, I could see that working well with music.
So beautiful.
Yeah, really neat. And it kind of sort of, it's not the classical definition of synesthesia, but it's sort of a play on it, you know, and turning space and sound and imagery into sound, just morphing it all together, right?
100%.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Yeah, for me, my favorite thing is travel, I have to say. As sort of pedestrian as that is, how it can just take you to, the pyramids or, the pyramid thing that I saw. I was like, shit. I'm there.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Just so amazing.
And for kids, I think that's the most valuable thing we could be giving them right now in VR is travel experiences.
And what they could also do for, if it depends where you sit on zoos and aquariums and shit like that, which, we're kind of as a society changing our probably not a good idea to put animals in little cages.
It
changes
makes
everything.
Me devastated.
Yeah, it's terrible. Sad, right? Wow. So, we talked earlier though a little bit about the technology limitations with VR. The Vive is you need a PC. It's kind of expensive. If you already have a beefed out PC and you're a gamer, it's a little bit better. But if you don't, you got to do all this. It's, running you in the thousands. What do you think is the best sort of someone listening, I want to get into VR, what's the best entryway, sort of gateway?
So the thing is unless you have a Vive or an Oculus or unless you have a friend who does, I don't typically encourage people to go out and buy a cheap headset just because it's just, to me, it's not the same experience. If it's not immersive, If it's not fully, if you can see the pixels on the screen, then to me, it kind of takes away from the experience. So I don't know, until it gets cheaper and better. I don't really like encouraging people to have their first quote unquote VR experience with Google Cardboard.
Yeah. We were, me and Duncan Trussell, and then I went and did it again. We're kind of trying to fuse VR inside the flotation tank.
That's right. You told me about that.
Yeah, we were doing a little bit of that.
So cool.
But it was so hampered by the technology. We were using the, a Samsung Galaxy inside of the gear.
Yeah.
And it was, the battery ran out too quickly, all sorts of things like that. It got too hot, it overheated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, just sort of things like that. But yeah, it was limited, but I thought that very, very cool where that could go. So,
super cool.
Yeah. Your music, the first single is out. Is that right?
First single is out. Album will be out end of the year. I Am AI.
I Am It. Where do you get the single? Where do you go to get it?
You can watch it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Taryn. It's also up on iTunes and Amazon and Spotify. It's called, what's the song called? Break Free. Break Free is the name of the song. Yeah. And there'll be many more to come till the remainder of the year. So it'll be a fun project.
Taryn Southern, it's a pleasure. As always, thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So that was episode 100 of the podcast. Please check back next week for another exciting interview. We have Gary Baum, who is the journalist behind the now sort of quickly very legendary piece on Angeline in The Hollywood Reporter. And also check out the Maps podcast, It's on iTunes and everywhere else. Thanks.